The Branding Your Business podcast is for small business owners looking to build a customer favorite brand and a value-driven business. From solo shows covering marketing tactics to experts sharing their brand stories, each episode delivers actionable insights for entrepreneurs who want to impact the world. We're sharing how strategic moves and authentic connections can build a profitable business minus the burnout. Tune into the Branding Your Business podcast with me, Praise Santos McKenna of Come Plum, to design a brand your audience adores while building a life you love. Another episode of the Branding Your Business podcast, and I have the honor of having my friend Tania here. Tania and I, what I love about the entrepreneur community is I feel like fate was going to introduce us anyway. We had so many other mutual friends. We had heard about each other. And then she said yes to coming to my dog workout at the dog park of all places because she happened to be in San Francisco. Great human, so good to meet her in person. But let me just brag about my friend Tania. She heads up Lumos Marketing, which is a thought leadership consultancy for social impact entrepreneurs ready to stand out as they stand up for their mission. She offers personal brand messaging, storytelling, and community building strategy for LinkedIn, along with coaching to dismantle imposter thoughts, which we're going to get into that so much more. She is also a fellow podcaster. She hosts the Campfire Circle, which explores the idea of replacing the boardroom table as the ultimate space of leadership with a Campfire Circle, a place to share our stories, build inclusive community, and spark visionary ideas. Also, it just sounds like I want to wrap myself in a blanket with Campfire Circle, take out my s'mores, just like sit down with the girlies, like have a chat. And that's what the Campfire Circle podcast is. So excited to have Tania here with us today because we're going to dive into things that are just juicy and delicious. But Tania, I feel like even that beautifully written bio doesn't do you as much justice as the multidimensional woman that you are. Would you like to maybe add some more color to your introduction?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's just so amazing to be here. That was so delightful to just listen to. And I think your energy and your passion just like made that come to life. What would I add to that? I mean, I'm a dog mom, but that's something we have in common, you know. Um, I'm a California native. Like you said, I love storytelling and really believe in its capacity for social change. I think storytelling is the most powerful tool we have as change makers, which is something that I hope to consider myself as, something I consider you for sure. Yeah, and I'm just so excited for this chat.
Dog moms unite. I had a dream of when I started my dog's Instagram that I wanted him to be a dog thought leader. And so that was my intention in starting it, of just like, wouldn't it be so funny if his Instagram was filled with messaging about other dogs could also grow their social influence? So it was a good idea. And then I couldn't continue with it because it just took too much energy. But I was like,
It was just too much, but that is a great idea. I think that could really take off. I don't know if I know any other dog thought leaders that are working to build other dogs up, but I love it. In a different vein, when I started my dog's Instagram, it was actually the last election and it was a very stressful time. And so it was just something that I created to just have fun, right? Like, so rarely do we have things that we do that are just for fun and whimsy. And that was very much what that was about. And it's just continued, 4 years later
is
into the
it
next
at,
election
at
cycle.
Gary the Grumpkin?
It is Gary the Grumpkin. And with
Yes.
Gary, I think, because it's silly and it's whimsical. And at the same time, we kind of use some of our same tools around like, what is the voice? What is the brand of Gary? And so he's very grumpy, but he's also somebody that I look up to because he doesn't take any shit. He's just a little mini schnauzer chihuahua who won't take anybody's crap.
He knows who he is, and he's
That's it.
unapologetic about it. Like, what an
That's it.
inspiration. We're going into another election year, Tania, so we need more dog-focused content. Also, I'm going to do a plug for at Bubbles, but I go by Bubs also right now while we're chatting about it, which I love that. I love the idea of play and fun because I do feel like as builders and entrepreneurs, I love that we get so jazzed by these new ideas of how we can serve people. And it is fun for us, right? We are passionate people, but there needs to be also sometimes things that have no end goal of growth.
Yes, not everything has to be monetized, right? We can just like squeeze the juice out of life and that is enough. That is
And
enough.
that is enough. Yeah, that is actually one of my big focus is this year. I'm like, Grace, did you play? Did you have
Mm,
fun? Did you just like paint and not try to like sell a painting after? Like, are you making things that
yes.
are not for profit, but it's just for you and your eyes only? That is also just I think about this too. I know that you and I have a Venn diagram of wanting to help a lot of women of color
Yeah.
leaders and helping them to live like these incredible lives that they thought was for someone else, but really it's they can do it. It's for them. But it's also one of those things like, hey, as we're also helping you build like your vision and dream, are you making sure you're living a full life that you're also just sleeping and resting just because I know the work you do is putting a lot of these women to the forefront, but it's also trying to make sure they have their whole people and not just
Yeah.
denying these parts of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something that I think that we get to carry the torch. I think so many of us maybe have seen parents or grandparents or aunties or people, older women of color in our life who didn't necessarily get to have that. And so I think as we step into those spaces, we get to heal for them too, and like multiple, generations forward and generations backwards. And
A
that's a huge
100%.
gift. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm like diving way too deep, getting again too excited. Let's backtrack a little bit because Lumos Marketing has been around for a few years, but what is your story? How did you start with this focus? How did Lumos Marketing, the Campfire podcast, how did it come about?
Yeah. Well, it all arose from my own lived experience. I grew up in the nonprofit space. I went to UC Irvine here in Southern California, and fresh out of school, I started working in the nonprofit community. And one of the very first tasks that was given to me as like a baby fundraiser was to collect impact stories. And so I would connect with alumni and family members and people who were affected by impacted by the organization I worked for, which was a women's mental health care organization, and and collect stories, right? With permission, with a lot of curiosity, with a lot of relationship building involved. But what I saw so often was that the stories that would emerge were still very much rooted in the shame and guilt of the addiction story. And as we began really looking at their narrative, we were able to reposition that focus of the story more on their transformation and their vision for the future and their hopes and what they were proud of. And what I saw from that process was not only that, when you change the story that you have about yourself, other people begin to take notice and see you differently. But also, those individuals, I saw how they were able to better advocate for themselves, but also for mental health in general. Like many of these individuals started nonprofits, they became speakers, they dedicated their social media presence to like advocating for women in recovery. And I was like, wow, like storytelling is not just about storytelling, it's about like change making. And that's really where I saw that happen. And then, sort of on a parallel path, I was kind of growing in the organization. I eventually became the executive director of its foundation. And I realized, oh, I have to show up and tell my story. Like, I have to build a face and let our community members know who I am in order to build relationship that can lead to funding for our org. And so it was hard as heck, praise. Like it was really hard. And there were a lot of reasons for that. And, strategy is part of it and, lack of time is part of it. But I would say the biggest piece is those self-limiting beliefs, or I like to call them systematically limited beliefs because we weren't born with them. They're not ours to claim or carry like they are natural protective responses to the systems that we live in and have been socialized in. And so through my own lived experience of overcoming those pieces, which, was not an overnight thing at all. I'm still it's actually probably never going to be complete. There's always new levels to it. But that's where I became so passionate about supporting other women and especially women of color, like you said, in getting visible and sharing their thought leadership. And for me, the platform that I've kind of chosen, the vehicle I've kind of chosen is LinkedIn, because I have seen that that's where a lot of the movers and shakers and decision makers kind of hang out. But I love working with women of color so much because I have found that, 10 times out of 10, they're underestimated experts. Like they're so good at what they do. And part of that is because they've had to work twice as hard, to get just as far. But, they have so many new answers based on their lived experience. And if we can amplify that, our world will be better as a result.
there's just so much here. First, what I'm hearing from you too is even when you were starting career in the nonprofit sector, you were an entrepreneur in that sense, right? Like you had
Mm.
kind of the mindset of, hey, I'm not just doing what I'm told. Like I'm told to gather these stories, but you also put on your thinking cap of like, wait, how do I evaluate the work I'm doing? How do I see the power and the impact of the work I'm doing? And it just led you to continue to apply that work as you continue to move up in that organization, which I know a lot of our audience are actually people who might have an employer right now, and we love that. But I also want to encourage a lot of those women to put on, they have dreams of being an entrepreneur right now, but if you can put that entrepreneur hat right now while you're within an organization, that already gives you the skills of what it would be like to be a leader for yourself. And so I love that in your story too. And I love how you made the connections of, wow, it's about telling stories well. It's about connecting with people on a human level. And I think you, even in your honesty of seeing the pattern in our community of women of color, of what was that phrasing that you said, that underestimated experts?
Yeah, underestimated or undercover expert or under-recognized. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's huge, because it's both by, again, like the systems that are around us, but oftentimes we start to believe the systems around us and then we start viewing ourselves that way too, which I think is such a big part of your work. It's not only something you did kind of unearthing in your own story, but I know that this is a big thing that you work with women as well. It's that imposter syndrome of, okay, I know everyone tells me I'm supposed to share my story online. I'm gonna share my, and they like try to hype themselves up, and then suddenly they're like, who am I to share my story online? I'm not
Yeah.
this person. I'm not that. I don't know what I'm doing. And then suddenly we're just like, no, we're not good enough. No, actually, I'm gonna wait till next week, next year. And they put it off, and then it becomes this cycle. And so I know that you and I have talked about this before, but I would love to dive into that a little bit more. Like, what are the trends that you see amongst women right now who are kind of battling with imposter syndrome? Like, how does that happen? How does that come about?
Yeah, so interestingly, one of the things that I've been very influenced by is this article by Jodi Embury and Ruchika Tulshan that ran in the Harvard Business Review. And there's a part two as well, but essentially it's called Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. And I think they really lay out very beautifully some of the reasons why this comes up. So in the initial research that was done, I want to say in the 70s by two female psychologists, where the term imposter phenomenon first arose. All of the research participants were from a certain class. They were white. They were, relatively successful, university educated women. And so a lot of the research and the understanding of imposter syndrome as we know it kind of came from those pieces. But the reality is, when we take a bigger zoomed out look, I mean, and we think about the stories of, watching, just the experiences that we had as women of color and not necessarily being invited to share at the table, or feeling like we have to be humbled to a fault, or seen and not heard, or even culturally some of the languaging we have, like the tallest bamboo gets whacked, or the all these different sayings and cultural mores that we have. I think it's less about having a syndrome or something being wrong with us, and more just realizing and understanding, like, oh, these are some of the ways that we have been shaped. And so as far as the trends of how I think I see imposter thoughts, or perfectionism, which is, I think, very much related, or um urgency, and really, as I started digging deeper into this, I realized that many of these pieces are actually, what have been identified as like characteristics of white supremacy culture, characteristics that arise from living in the systems that we live in. So fear, perfectionism, urgency, feeling like there's one right way to do things, having a tendency to wanting to produce like quantity over quality. And there's a whole variety. And I'll share the article that I'm thinking of with you, in case you want to share it in the show notes. It's really, really illuminating. But as soon as we begin to realize that these are responses that came up again as protective responses, and they're not ours, and they're things that we can consciously look at and begin to rebuild our relationship with, I think things start to shift. And then I think also, and I don't know if I'm quite answering your question, I think I'm kind of rambling, but the other thing that I feel like is coming up here is I think the solution to these imposter these all these things, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, etc., is being in community that gets it, right? Because then we realize we're not the only one that's struggling with it. We realize that there is a whole host of people who can relate and we can talk to about, and that can lift us up when we decide to make that first post, if you will. And so that's why one of the kind of strategies I would say I have two strategies that I start off right off the bat with people who are really struggling with fear around showing up. And one is getting very clear on your vision for a changed world. Like if you could show up and share your stories and begin to disseminate your wisdom and your practice at scale, how could the world change as a result of that, you know? And it's not necessarily going to happen, you know, immediately or maybe even in your lifetime, but that's okay. Like you're planting the seeds for a different world. And so can you get really clear on what that looks like? And that's what your post is leading to, right? That those your posts and your content and you sharing on LinkedIn are the bricks that create that new home, you know, that you're excited about. So that's the one thing, is a vision. And then the other piece is, again, wrapping yourself up in community, values aligned community that also have that vision, who are then cheering you on, lifting you up. They've got your back, and everything becomes easier when you've got those folks lifting you up.
You weren't rambling. You were very much answering my question too, just because, yeah, even just even getting curious about the phrase imposter syndrome, like, wait, is that now also a systemic thing that we have like applied to ourselves too? One thing to get curious about, but even these feelings of perfectionism of like, "Ugh, this thing has to be excellence before we can put it." One of the clients I'm working with is a true leader in her field. And she's trying this new thing where she's trying to branch out on her own. And she expects herself to be at a level of her 20 years in her career now in this new venture. And it's one of those things where it's like, hey, what if you, again, like, get curious about why you're expecting this of yourself? Like, where is that thought even coming from?
Yeah.
Two, yeah, think about what kind of how the world will be better once you start putting this out there. Exactly what you said, this clear vision of the world. And it's so practical of just getting a community around you of just like, hey, don't worry, you're not going to be talking to no one. Like, tell us when you post that thing. We're going to cheer it on. We're going to comment
Yeah.
it. We're going to share it. And those are such easy ways of kind of just doing it when you even have the feeling, like through the feeling. You don't have to get rid of the feeling of I'm an imposter or it has to be perfect. It's a friend of mine says doing it scared, doing it
Yeah.
even with those feelings, and just start taking like little steps at a time. I think that
Yes.
is really huge. Have you seen it was so interesting because you said that this study was specifically with white educated women. And I know you and I love working with women, specifically women of color, like we are children of immigrants. There's a lot of different other things kind of at stake here. Do you see other commonalities amongst like this even more niche audience of people we get to work with?
Well, when I think about it in terms of, you know, we are both daughters of immigrants and daughters of Asian immigrants. And so that's the experience that, you know, that's a shared experience we carry. And I think that the perfectionism is really strong there, especially when I have read about, you know, different cultures and how even the ways that you know, uh, Asian cultures have farmed in terms of like rice paddies versus other types of farming. Like you had to be a lot more specific and measured and perfect in the ways that you farmed, like essentially like tended to your rice, or you'd be effed. Like you had to really, and so some of that carries on. And I think we can honor, and that's just like one example, right? I think that we can honor that legacy and at the same time understand and know that we're in a different space now and now we can let things be messy, you know. And I think that so often sometimes we fall in a trap of wanting to punish that part of ourselves, like, oh, like, you know, if only I could do this, or oh, I just so wish that I could just get rid of this piece. And like those pieces are there for a reason. Those pieces are benevolent forces, they're not meaning to stop us from doing what we want to do. And so I think the more we can build relationship with it, the better. And yeah, I don't know. How does that land with you?
Yeah, that is so interesting to even think like culturally where our ancestors have come from, how their work ethic was developed, right? Like they came often from a culture of um, you had to be so systemized and operationalized in what you did, and it totally makes sense that they would pass that on to the next generation. I also loved, I've never heard that quote said of like the tallest bamboo gets the whack, right? I
Yeah.
feel like there's always something like that, like the nail that sticks out gets also the hammer.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
another good one versus the American idiom of like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. They're
Mm,
even the sayings that we have in the different cultures are different, and so they shape us tremendously. Yeah, but we get to come up with our new sayings, right? We
mhm.
get to come up with our new sayings. Maybe we should come out with like a little picture book of sayings for visibility sayings that we
Oh,
can adopt.
yes. Also, there was this quote by Albert Einstein I was reading the other day of like, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be really
Ah,
intelligent, read them a lot of fairy tales. I was like, what if we wrote like really great children's books about this too, so that like systemically we're putting in good also from a very young age. This is our new side project, okay?
I know. I'm
This could be
obsessed. I am
that could
obsessed.
be
Well,
amazing.
I really love that because the reality is reading fiction is such a good ball, not just balm for our soul, but like it helps us imagine in new and different ways. And I think that's such a huge skill for the work that we do. I think in order to create a new society, to change the ways things have always been done, to beat the status quo, to like uh, essentially move towards a more just society, we have to be able to imagine it first. And fiction helps us do that, right? Fiction helps us do that. So let's do it.
That's good. Yeah, you heard it now. Pre-order our children's book that we have no real concept for, but we got an idea of how we want people to feel at least. We know that the effect we want to make on the world, which I know in our, again, like Venn diagram of our branding work, that's really what we help people do. Kind of help see the future and help lay out
Yeah.
steps for them to get there, which I think is huge. And I do think you do that really well. A thing that you've done really well recently, and I was just obsessed by, is that you do a really good job of, again, like unmasking things that our society says that we need and actually like, hey, here's the truth. So if you all go to Tanya's LinkedIn, she recently had this post that was so fun. She was like, yeah, I have 9,923 followers. And you're like, wait, why is that such a specific number? And your whole post is about, yeah, let's just celebrate. Like, numbers actually don't really matter. You think I'm going to celebrate when I hit 10,000, when I hit 20,000, but what if we celebrate all along the way? And I love that you were just like, these are vanity metrics. Like, the effect that you're having on people, impacting people is really the thing we should be celebrating, which you just did such a good job of illustrating that for us. Can you tell me more about wins people should be looking for? So that whole post was about, hey, don't look at the numbers, look at the impact. What other
Yeah.
wins can people be focusing on instead?
Yes. Oh, such a good question. I like to think of this as like quote unquote, tracking resonance over reach. Resonance is this term from physics, which is like when a object starts vibrating more and more and more. And so I think sometimes that's what we're really trying to do with our content. We're not trying to reach as many people as possible. Maybe we are, it depends on the situation. But what I really am interested in is getting people's energy up, getting people's thought waves up, changing their hearts and minds around a certain topic. And that's very difficult to track in like traditional ways. You can't really build a dashboard in Airtable to track that because so much of that is invisible. Um, it can look like somebody reading your content and like handing the phone over to their partner and say, oh my gosh, look at this. This is something we need to do. Or them maybe sending you a message that says, wow, like I've never thought about it this way, but you've really opened my eyes to this new way of thinking. Or it could be, somebody reaching out with an application in Honeybook who's like, I've been following you for 2 years and everything that you have said has been so illuminating. And now I'm in a position where I'm ready to, invest in your services. It's like these little magical serendipitous moments that you just begin to discern and begin to pick up on. Another thing that we haven't talked about is you are leading a group of women through a process of reading The Artist's Way and really like working the artist's way and building our creativity. And we're in like a WhatsApp group together. And we were just talking about that in the WhatsApp group. Like all of us were seeing rainbows on the same day. And how cool is that? And just to be able to notice that. And there's something there, like there's something there. When we train ourselves to begin to see these magical moments, we realize, oh, we are making much more of an impact than maybe our analytics are telling us. Because if we can make an impact really on just a handful of people, each person, each human being is a world unto themselves, and they're out in their communities telling people about you, telling, encouraging people based on the advice that you've shared out in the world. And there's this ripple effect that you're making that you might not even be privy to. But I think sometimes it's about trusting that process and believing that it's happening, and then just trusting the serendipitous things that are showing up to back up that point. How does that land with you?
Yeah, 100%. It's one of those things that someone phrased it that looking at the data, like we need to know how to look at our data. So if all of you have like an email list, like learn where the analytics are. Like it is important, but then know where it is and then learn the rules and then break them. Like, okay, we know what it is to have these numbers that we want, but what is that thing that really matters? It's the text message. It's the
Yeah.
aha moment that people have. I know that when I get text messages like that, I screenshot it and I save it to a folder on my phone called kind words from people, just so that I can tap back into it when I feel like I'm thinking like, why am I spending my own time doing this? Is this even making a difference? But when I look at those messages, I remember this matters. Like the work we do matters. It's going from the masculine, which is very like data driven, we X equals Y, like so linear, into a little bit more of the feminine. So it's not male or gendered. It's just like the side of us that's a little more intuitive. That's a little more like, I know in my gut, this is making a difference in people's lives. I know in my gut that if I tell my story, the world will be a different place and I'm going to save people the headaches of the mistakes that I went through myself. And it's this kind of magical, open handed approach to our business that I call like intuitive business leading that I'm so
Yeah.
excited about because it's hard to teach people. We have so many frameworks. I know you and I both coach and mentor. We have like so many spreadsheets, so many templates we can send people. But the real thing is really just getting people to tap into, hey, where's that energy coming from right now that's telling you you have that nudge, you need to write about this because it's going to resonate with someone even if they don't book your services 2 or 3 years later. You're making the impact that you want to make in the world now. How do we listen to that? Those are like the rainbows that are inside of us. Also, small plug for the Artist Way. I go through it every January. I always lead a group, so always ping me for that. Tanya is doing it with me this year. But it's a book that helps you kind of open your eyes to the magic that's around us. And it's a reminder for me too of, wow, we're really not in control. We think that, okay, I have a posting schedule. I'm going to post Monday through Thursday at 2 p.m. every day. And here's my thing. And you can do that. But where is that magic? Where is that kind of feminine leading instead of, I know that I'm going to impact people in this way. And so when I get the right feeling to do, I'm going to get the inspiration. I'm going to write it. I'm just going to go for it. That's the kind of businesses I want to see in the world. Those are the kind of leaders I want to be in a room with too. So that totally resonates with me, what you said.
Yeah, and those are always supposed to do the best. Like I can batch a bunch of content and have it be strategic and have it be like ready to go. And then like in the moment, I will think of a random, like that post that you mentioned, that was just a random, I was just like, well, let me just put this out there and see what happens. And that post ends up really resonating. So yes, when we have those nudges, it's for a reason. And two, that saying, how we do one thing is how we do everything. And so similarly, when you take that practice on with your content, it bleeds into every other area of your life. Like you say the thing that needs to be said in the moment, in the relationship, in the, so yeah, it has a ripple effect all around.
That's so, so good. Have you been wanting to start a business but are feeling overwhelmed with the long list of to dos? I feel you. I've been there too. That's why I created an e guide called Pivot to help you start your own consulting business. It's filled with tools, templates, and resources for you to discover your marketable skills and how to land your first client. Here at Complum, we're about empowering individuals to pursue a career and a life on their own terms. Pivot will equip you to build a life that's aligned with your values. Curious? Go ahead and check out our show notes to preview Pivot. Who are other business leaders or just leaders with lifestyle, anything that you're looking up to right now? You're like, oh, I really like the way they lead. I really like the way they write. Maybe they are more kind of intuitive in what they talk about. Is there anyone that we should be following too?
Ah, gosh, so many people. I mean, I'm truthfully not just saying this because we're having this conversation, but you are an amazing person to be on your email list. Like, I love reading your stories, and especially because you have the courageous, you share what's going on, right? You share what's going on, and it really, it just allows, because we live in the same state, but we don't live in the same town, and so I get to really stay in touch with you. So when we have these moments where we get to be face to face, like I feel like I know what's going on in your world, and we can just like build on that. And I think you're an amazing person to follow and be inspired by. And gosh, there's so many people, and this is might be a little bit of a cop out, but I'm going to take a slightly different direction. But I think that we can get so much inspiration from weird places like nature, right? Like I went to Hawaii, and I went to an arboretum, and there was so much inspo there. Like, I saw a walking palm, which I'd never seen before. So it's a palm tree, tall palm tree that literally they'll move. They will uproot their roots and start walking towards what they need. If they're not getting enough light, if they're not getting enough water, if they're not getting whatever, they're just gonna bounce. They're just gonna walk away. And they're a tree. And there's so many of us humans who have feet and legs who can't do that. And so that was inspiration to me. There's another type of tree, also a palm, that just like shoots up as it grows extremely fast, extremely fast, as tall as it can, because somehow it knows that as long as it can get to that sunlight and like move beyond the rest of the tree cover, it will get what it needs sooner. And so it like shoots up super fast, super tall, and like enjoys that sunlight. And I feel like there's a visibility lesson in there somewhere. So we, again, like maybe that's the theme of this conversation. If we're paying attention, I think there's inspiration in so many other places, like nature. And so I would look for inspiration in weird places. That's my tip.
That walking palm, I had such a visual of it. I don't know if it was like a Dr. Seuss visual. I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing got feet, and it's just like moonwalking across the arboretum. Like, what is it doing? But then I got chills, like just hearing like, this is nature. Like things that are alive know how to get what it needs. And so, yeah, there's so much inspiration there. And I love that because this is also a good example of sometimes when we show up online, we consume so much. We consume so much content, and that kind of gets us into the spiral of comparison.
Yes.
They're doing things better than me. This is all out there. But what you're really saying is like, hey, step back. There are stories of leadership all around you. There are stories of inspiration all around you. And that is actually kind of the art of just being able to communicate, hey, this is the beauty of life. We can learn from everything and sharing those stories too. And that's also what I do on my email list of just like feeling like, hey, people probably need to hear this is what's happening in my life and my health. I need to tell people these behind the scenes things of the everyday. And so thanks for plugging my email list, but also thank you for reminding us of beautiful palms doing incredible, inspirational things.
Yes. Well, you just said, I mean, these are leadership lessons, because these trees, these animals, these birds, these nature things that we look at, they've been able to escape predation and extinction for way longer than we've been running businesses or even like been around as humans. So why not learn from them? And I think that should be that Dr. Seuss walking palm, that can be the first page of our children's book.
Again, this podcast is actually just like a brainstorm session for us. This is so good. Yes. And we'll do that. We'll like have the bamboo. It's going to be all the things.
Yes,
I love this.
I love it.
And this is also so me. I love like starting new. things. Like I feel like that's where my fun is. That's where my play is. That's kind of where my energy is. And this kind of loops back to what we were saying at the beginning of like, how can we just make things more fun, even though we're encouraging people to have like a life totally separate from work? Make sure you're having fun there. But this is another thing I'm so obsessed with of how can we put fun back into things we know we have to do too. You are truly like the master of LinkedIn and of sharing things that matter, but you're not, you seem like you're having fun while you're doing it. And that's like the most inspirational part about it. Do you have any tips of how to make posting on LinkedIn more fun again?
Yeah, well, you know what? I think there's a misconception around LinkedIn that it's like purposefully not fun, like it's stuffy, it's corporate, it's boring. And LinkedIn has been around since before MySpace. It's been around since 2002. And so it's changed a lot over the years, and I will agree it was not fun in the back in the day. It was like made very much for finding a job and just being very like I don't know, sterile, I guess. But it has changed a lot over the years. You know, people like Ryan Reynolds and Snoop Dogg and NFL players and these personalities are showing up on LinkedIn because they know it's a space where they can, promote their brand and share and maybe even secure, I don't know if they're securing brand deals, but like they're talking about the business initiatives that they're doing on there. And that's an amazing thing, right? And so I think ways to make it fun. One, of course, root into your community because content is just one piece of it. I think community is the emergent property of sharing content, right? Values aligned community. So like look at who's showing up, build relationship with them. Like if you're in their town, get a cup of coffee with them or go to a dog workout with them, build relationships. And that's for me what makes it fun. And then two, I think of LinkedIn as fun, yes, but also as like a self-actualization tool. It can be like a tool for self-expression and even healing because so often the work that we are doing in the world as coaches, consultants, service providers is related to the work that somehow we needed, in our own lived experience. Like oftentimes we are serving the person that we once were or still are. And so if we can let our content be almost like a ode to what we needed in that time or a conversation with our past selves and almost like a way of self-parenting, like, you know, um, perfectionism and imposter thoughts are definitely a part of my story. So it's like, what did I need to hear when I was 22 years old and I was just trying to like show up as best as I could and I had no idea how, whatever lesson I needed to hear, somebody in my audience needs to hear. So it's like, how can we show up with a generosity of spirit and provide value and know that that's all we have to do, right? That's all we have to do. And the right people will show up as a result. I think for me, that's what makes it fun. Both for me, it makes it fun. And I think that fun shows up in the way that it lands for other people.
Yeah, you just blew my mind several times because one made me think about MySpace, which had no idea LinkedIn was older than MySpace. Also makes me wonder if you had like a cool song in your background on your MySpace, or if you had a cool cursor. I've That's how I low key learned HTML, was just to make your
Me
MySpace nice.
too. Yeah, me too. And GeoCities as well, like making all my little sites about InSync and whatever.
Yes, yes, these are also things that matter and also live somewhere on the internet. But also made me think of, oh yeah, like if Snoop Dogg and Ryan Reynolds are having fun on LinkedIn, we can have fun on LinkedIn, even if it's just talking, yeah, to the past versions of us. And that's the thing is that we already know the content that we need to be posting. I love that
Yeah.
framing of just, hey, what is something that could have helped you when you were in your 20s, where you were at in your business 5 years ago? Write about that because you're just writing from experience. You don't
Yeah.
need to be so far ahead. I feel like you use this analogy a lot that when you go to college, you're not being toured around by the dean, you're being toured around by like an upperclassman, just so someone few steps ahead, showing you the ropes and just having fun, being yourself with that. That seems like a content strategy I could get behind for sure.
1,000%. And the way, the way that I would define the work that I do is really thought leadership, but that is kind of a fluffy word. Like, what does that even mean? So I really sat down and tried to come up with a very specific definition, an intentional definition. And for me, it is like a consistent practice of sharing your passion, your lived experience, and your credibility as fuel to spark trust and community as you imagine and shape the future together for the better. So every piece of that is intentional. But for me, it's like, you just got to share what you're passionate about. You just got to share the things in your lived experience, and then share some of the things that make you credible, which don't have to be necessarily like advanced degrees or even years of experience, but just things that you did in the past, right? Like transferable skills that you have. Like I often tell the story of how when I was like 7 years old, I gathered my family around and I was like, had a family meeting and I was like, you guys, we have to pick our family color and our family logo and our family flag. And and that was just something that was so clear to me that we had to do. And that's branding. That's branding. So like we've been doing what we've been doing in so many cases, like our whole lives. So we just have to share from that.
7-year-old Tanya, my new
Oh,
favorite
so cute.
7-year-old. I cannot. Is she looking for an internship? Can she come to our brand studio? Like, we need to find where
Yes.
7-year-old Tanya is
I
right now.
know. She was such a gem. I appreciate her so much.
Ugh, I loved your definition about thought leadership. I like that intentionality around it. Of it sounded like you gave people a lot of permission of taking this stuffy title, and instead it's like, hey, share your passions, your lived experience, the vision you want to create in the world, and just talk about it. I think that gives us so much more space to play then, which I really, really love. Um, Tanya, this has been amazing. I know people will want to find you and support you. How can they do that?
I think the best way to find me is definitely LinkedIn. I that's where I'm at. So just find me on LinkedIn. And then if they want to kind of hear more about my thoughts around thought leadership, storytelling, content, branding, check out my podcast, which, like you said, is called the Campfire Circle. And I think those are the two best places.
Okay, great. And I know that you even have a freebie for LinkedIn content, and they can just find that on your website. Is that right?
Yeah, they can find it on my website on the top banner. And maybe what I'll do if you're open to it is I'll just send you the link. It's just
Yeah.
a link. It's just a freebie with 14 prompts, like kind of reflection questions almost, to help tease out those thought leadership pieces that are already inside you and get them onto LinkedIn.
That is so perfect. Well, thank you so much. I enjoy sharing space with you, however it is, digital, at a dog park, etc. As we're like co-writing our children's book, like I love it all.
This is such a treat. You are such a gem of a human. I really, really appreciate our friendship, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.